In my last video, I briefly mentioned how one of the tools we can use to help better understand a time period is contemporary artwork, meaning pieces that were produced during the time period in question, and preferably done so by individuals with an attention to detail who were actually present for the events that they're portraying in whatever medium it happens to be. Now, depending on the topic, there could be hundreds of such examples, or there could be just a very precious few. That's the difficulty with studying history that predates photography. Sometimes people just didn't paint certain things or certain places and whatnot. But thankfully, even just a single painting can tell us so much, and of course, inspires so many more questions. And to show you what I mean practically there, I wanted to take just a few moments, a quick little video, hopefully, to look over one such painting, a personal favorite of mine, and one of the most important when it comes to studying the British Army of the mid to late 18th century. This piece is part of a series of 6 oil paintings portraying various elements of garrison life dated circa 1771. They're typically referred to collectively as the 25th Regiment of Foot in Menorca, or more simply among historians of the British Army, the Menorca paintings. They're all unsigned, but attributed to the Italian artist Giuseppe Chiesa, whose name I'm probably mispronouncing, and who came to the island as a young boy, for reasons that we don't want to really get into here. He's considered very important to the art history of Menorca. He painted a lot of different scenes of the island. It's not just military stuff. I'll include some information for him down in the description below if you'd like to learn more about that part of things. But for our purposes, each of the Menorca paintings is an absolute wealth of military information, and in this video I'd like to discuss one of those paintings in particular, portraying Lieutenant Colonel Robert Watson, that's this fellow in the middle with the pup, reviewing a guard. But first, some background information on Menorca and what makes this piece so interesting to begin with. The 25th Foot was stationed in Menorca from 1769 up to 1775, which is really just a fascinating time period in British Army history for a lot of different reasons. The 7 Years' War only ended a few years prior, with Menorca itself having a bit of a turbulent history throughout it. Having started as a British possession, they took it earlier on from the Spanish in the last war, then it was, in the 7 Years' War, captured by the French, and then handed back to the British afterwards in exchange for Guadeloupe. Then later in the American War of Independence, it would again fall, this time to the Spanish, only to again be given back to the British after the fact. Despite the fact that the British lost the war, they were still able to reclaim some of their possessions. It's a whole thing. But the 25th Foot wasn't there to defend Menorca from the Spanish in 1781 because they had been redeployed at that point to Gibraltar. But point is, like I was saying, 69 to 75, this sort of like interwar time period, really interesting one. Not only because the 25th in this case is garrisoning a very important position during a fairly tenuous time, but also because the army itself was undergoing a lot of changes. In 1764, a new manual exercise was introduced, which updated and, in fact, improved, streamlined a great deal of the army's drill. So by the time of these paintings, the drill is already a few years old. A lot of the guys are going to have joined up only ever knowing that system, but still, on the whole, it's a relatively new structure. And what's more so is that in 1768, so 4 years after, we get a royal clothing warrant, which likewise changes up the army's uniforms in some pretty big ways. And those sorts of changes, more material changes, they're going to take a longer time to take effect, especially in the British Empire's many far-flung garrisons, and in a day and age when most military kit was being purchased by individual regiments and individual officers for the men and whatnot, not being issued from central authorities out of, central, military storehouses and whatnot. So keeping all of that context in mind, this context of a shifting army, if you will, let's look at that painting again and see what it might tell us. The first thing you might notice are these Grenadiers and their myriad appearances. Most obviously, one of them is wearing a mitre cap while the others have bearskins. So what's going on there? Well, the mitre cap is an outdated bit of uniform. They were gotten rid of in 1768 in the warrant and replaced with bearskins. Even now, a few years though after the new warrant was introduced, it's evident that this man, for one reason or another, hasn't yet received the updated headgear. Although, when you look at his coat, it seems like that part has been updated to the newer style. Maybe that's why this man is standing apart from all the other three there. Maybe they're talking about how uncool his old hat is. But these guys shouldn't be ones to talk either because they're hardly perfect. You see, one man's bearskin has its plate, looking nice and stylish there, but the others are blank. They actually look a little bit more like modern-day bearskins for that reason, but, well, they shouldn't. Again, for one reason or another, all of these men's bearskins simply haven't yet been finished, despite all four of these Grenadiers coming from different regiments. Each one of them is, except for the one, wrong in one way or another. Likewise, some of these men have their cap cords, others don't. Maybe a shipment of clothing and materials and the like to the island was delayed at some point, but this is a wonderful demonstration of how just because something was in a regulation, well, doesn't inherently mean that it was always the case, especially so with uniforms, which took time and money to update. And consider that the Menorca garrison wasn't even all that far away from London when you compare it to, the real backwater posts like, say, the West Indies or certain African posts and whatnot, where one might imagine that certain uniform updates could take even longer. And while we're focusing on these four Grenadiers, there's another interesting thing to note, which is the way that they're standing with their hands tucked into their waistcoats. Now, lest anyone think that this kind of pose began with Napoleon, two of these men even have both of their hands tucked away under the waistcoat, but I wouldn't say that this scene is making them look cold at all. Maybe this is just a general comfort pose that these men have taken up. It's not a one that I recognize from any other pieces, at least not with both hands tucked into the waistcoat. That is something new to me. So if anyone does know of any other cases like that, I'd love to hear about them. The center man here as well seems to be without a firelock. Instead, he only carries his hanger, which, rather than being in its scabbard, is actually tucked under his arm. It's worth noting that at this point, Grenadier privates would still be carrying infantry hangers as a sort of badge of office of their being Grenadiers, but they weren't really expected to use them when they have a bayonet, which is far more practical and easier to use and the like, especially in formations, instead. These extra bits of unnecessary weight were only finally done away with in the American War of Independence. But then, why is this man carrying his sword thusly and without a firelock? Well, I haven't got a clue, and any ideas, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Maybe the guy was just putzing around on the island and he came up here to visit some of his friends who were on sentry duty, and then this scene just sort of unfolded before him. Or perhaps more likely, the artist was simply seeking to portray a variety of men in a variety of poses to help capture the sense of military life on the island. These two soldiers here are also at a very interesting position called the support, where the lock is held in the crook of the arm as the hand is thrown across the chest. Although in the proper exercise, this does not involve tucking the hand under the waistcoat, that seems to be just a cozy little addition that these men made. Now here's a little something for all of you modern military folks. Look at how this man, handing a report or a turn of some sort into the lieutenant colonel and his dog, also worthy of note how common pet dogs were in army encampments. That could be a whole video right there. But look at how this guy is saluting him. He's saluting with his left hand. And what's that in his hand? What? Oh, why, it's an Exter wallet, the sponsor of today's video. Oh, indeed. Did you know that Exter was a favorite brand among British soldiers stationed in Menorca? Oh, yes, it's true. You can see these two officers just there having a bit of a chat about its many features. What do you say we don't have a little listen in? Why, Charles, have you heard about Exter? Of course I have. Why, I never leave home without my Exter wallet. I just love the quick card access button and how even so sleek and modern a design can carry up to 12 cards plus all my cash. Not that I have much of it. Well, yes, I know you know about the wallet. I mean all their other products. Wait, they sell things other than wallets? Oh, do they ever? I'm shocked you've not seen any of the men patrolling about in their grid backpacks yet. Oh, look here. It has an air mesh ventilated back and is made out of a water-resistant fabric. Oh, it makes for a perfect sea chest whenever we get off this tiny little island, and it's filled to the brim with different little pockets and compartments for your laptop, your water bottle, valuables and documents. Oh, and perhaps the greatest of Exter's other product lines would be their brand new Finder card. Oh yes, it's only the size of a credit card, you see, and it's also water resistant, while a single charge will last you up to 6 months, all of which makes it perfect for a hard campaign. But what does it do? Why, it finds things, of course, which is to say, you leave it in your wallet or in your bag or any other equipage, and if you happen to misplace said equipage, well, you can track it down with your iPhone. Or you might even set up a left behind alert, which will warn you if you happen to forget your wallet at home. Why, that's wonderful! But what is an iPhone? You're starting to lose me with the jargon here, old boy. Oh, it doesn't matter. The point is that not only does Exter have their incredible wallet collection, but plenty of other products as well. So go and check them out by visiting the link in the description below. They're currently offering an utterly enormous Father's Day sale up to 40% off. Plus, of course, when you use code BrandonF at checkout, well, you can unlock even further savings. Wow, those men sure do love their Exter. Thank you to them for sponsoring this video. Now, as I was saying, this man here, look at how he's saluting with his left hand. That's odd, isn't it? Now, this may be anathema to you, but you must understand this was a time period well before things like saluting were fully formalized like they are today. This is not an incorrect salute. Indeed, during the 18th century, there were many different ways in which an individual might pay their respects to a superior officer, in this case, all depending on the context in which those individuals were placed. You know, seeing men salute with their left rather than right hands would have been common, and it was described by men such as Bennet Cuthbertson, who in Article 4, Chapter 22 of his book on the interior economy of a battalion of infantry, there's a mouthful for you, described how grenadiers, drummers, and all soldiers who wear caps, that is to say a bearskin or a light infantry cap, mitre cap, really anything other than a cocked hat, must pay their compliments to an officer on passing by bringing up the back of the hand, the furthest from him, to the front of the cap with a graceful motion and keeping it in that position as long as they would remain with their hats off, observing at the same time the other directions given in the third article. Well, what does that third article say? Well, it says that soldiers should be instructed never to avoid their officers through design, but rather to put themselves in the way of being seen, that they may have an opportunity of showing their respect by taking off their hats. Again, here we have cocked hats, which are a lot easier to just remove with one hand. With their left hand, with the left hand, see, I got that wrong there, and letting them fall in an easy, graceful manner down the thigh with the crown inwards, keeping their bodies erect, looking full at the officer they intend to compliment with a manly confidence, and walking by him very slow. This method, when executed properly, will have a much more striking effect than only putting the hand to the hat, and will be found not to injure the cock of it one bit more, notwithstanding that objection is made against it by several military persons. So there's a bit to unpack there. First and foremost, of course, that while Cuthbertson specifies that removing one's hat should be done with the left hand, owing, I think, to the way that cocked hats would be worn slightly off to the side rather than straight on, which would, make removing them with the right hand just a little bit more awkward. Well, he also says that when bringing up the hand to a cap, it should be done with whichever hand is further from the officer. So if you're walking along a road and the officer is to your right, well, you're not going to swipe across him with your arm, but instead you salute with the left. It is interchangeable. Or, presumably then, if you can use either hand in that situation, well, if, say, you're handing the officer a piece of paper with your right hand or it's otherwise occupied, well then, it's still acceptable. You can salute with the left all the same. This passage also helps to show us how there were disagreements within military circles over how all of this was meant to run, on what was proper and what was not. Cuthbertson is, after all, only one of these myriad military persons making suggestions on how he thinks the army should be run. He's not necessarily describing how it is run as policy. He's just offering his thoughts on what should be done. There's going to be a lot of variance, especially on a regiment-to-regiment basis, especially in this time period. Now, this quote also shows us a few very interesting differences to modern saluting, such as how the motion should be graceful, not sharp. A lot of modern-day saluting, it's very, like 1, 2. It's very like, boom, right up to the point to where, there's that great little clip of the officer kind of smacking the little girl in the face because the queen walks by and he's right to his action. We're emphasizing much more of a ballet-style, graceful saluting to be had here. And also, again, like how the officer shouldn't be, staring straight ahead, but meeting the officer's eyes directly, walk by him slowly and purposely put himself in the position to be seen by the officer. A lot of very interesting little details here that give us some information about the culture of, of the military back in the day, and some of these more, again, like practical day-to-day occurrences. And then, of course, Cuthbertson's chapter that's all about paying respects and saluting and such, it's far larger than just those 2 articles. It includes things like, for example, how a man should salute when he's under arms. So if you're interested in all that, well, you can find the entire book and plenty of other primary sources besides, provided all as free PDFs at my website, nativeoak.org, in the library section. But you know what? We're supposed to be here for a painting, not a book. We've been talking a lot about this, so let's go back to the painting, shall we? From here, there are just a few more interesting things that are worth noting, such as these officers' footwear. You see how the lieutenant colonel is wearing riding boots, but the other 2, who are off-duty, you can tell by their lack of sashes and gorgets, they're only wearing shoes. They don't even have any gaiters on, because, again, probably they're just off-duty and idly wandering around the garrison. But the reason it's worth noting is because typically in reenactment, riding boots like this, while a lot more comfortable in some ways, are very overrepresented among officers, especially if you're portraying a junior officer, or, if in any context you're on foot. It's probably better to just go with shoes, which were far more common. Another curious detail is if you look at this group here, our guard that the lieutenant colonel is inspecting. We have 10 soldiers all together with their sergeant, but included with that guard, which is otherwise consisting entirely of battalion men, well, for reasons I'm not entirely sure about, we have a grenadier thrown into the mix. You can tell that he's a grenadier not only because of the bearskin cap, which, to be fair, plenty of other roles in the army would also wear caps like that, fusiliers, pioneers, drummers, and fifers, but you can tell that he's a grenadier specifically because of the wings on his coat, and if you could just barely see it there, the match case on his belting. These are, again, just purely ceremonial indicators of rank, especially as grenadiers, for the most part, are no longer actually carrying grenades. So maybe the Grenadier Company was also supplying a man to whatever posting of sentries this guard consists of, and as such he's being inspected with the rest? Well, that's my best guess. But again, if anyone has any other potential answers or knows for a fact, please do let me know in the comments. But, there you go. Another really interesting question that may or may not lead us to some interesting information when we go deeper digging. It's just raised from a cursory look at a painting. And finally, I'd like to conclude with a brief mention to the men's drill. They're certainly all looking very professional, yes? Well, let's compare their stance to what is dictated in their new-ish 1764 manual exercise and see how they're all doing. The manual dictates that in the position of a soldier under arms, a man is to stand straight and firm upon his legs with his head turned to the right. Well, they've got that first part, but interestingly, their heads are all turned every which way. Half of them are looking to the right, as they should be to take their dressing, but it seems like half of them are looking the clear opposite direction. Was this a way for the artist to be able to show just a few more faces, make the scene feel a little bit more alive? Maybe if he was taking a sketch from a live scene, well, the men were stealing a few glances his way. They're curious, what's that guy doing up there on the hill with his sketch pad? Does this maybe tell us that the men were a little bit more lax about the regulations? Or does it say more about the painter? I'm not entirely certain, but again, any ideas, I'd love to hear them, and it poses interesting questions. To be sure, this idea that a soldier is a robotic entity, which, when you're at the position of a soldier under arms, you are looking immediately to the right and you do not deviate your head whatsoever. That's a very modern conception. Even footage of Victorian parades and photographs and whatnot will have men not exactly being the most, shall we say, professional by modern standards in terms of how they're going about their drill. There's some very sloppy dressing, there's some very sloppy eye and head discipline, if you will. But again, that's a whole other topic for a whole another time. But my point is that I really wouldn't put it outside the possibility that, if their officers have just kind of been ignoring them for a bit, talking to each other, going through some reports, blah, 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 even though these men aren't at ease, well, yeah, their eyes have just sort of started wandering around a little bit until they receive another order. Now, the manual continues that the men's heels are to be close, toes a little turned out, which is to say that this is something that reenactors get wrong all the time. The heels are not meant to be touching. Close, not closed. And at the first glance, well, it may seem like the soldiers have this wrong as well, but when you get really close in there, it's hard to see, I know, because, this isn't the best quality image, but you can actually just about make out a bit of space between these men's legs. At least a few of them. I think that it's hard to see it from this angle, but I do believe that if we had a better angle to see that, yes, all of these men are following that order properly. So while the heads are maybe a little bit lax because the officers are not quite paying attention to them, they've been in that position for a while, well, the legs are still, at the very least, fast in their appropriate position. And that, dear viewer, is my review of a painting, I guess. But, like I said, I think it can be amazing, the level of detail and information that we can receive from even just one seemingly simple piece like this. And as it is, there are still a lot of details in this one painting alone, that I skipped over for this video to keep the time down. And besides that, of course, I'm sure there's even more elements and factors that, completely went over my head. If there's any particular information you have about this piece or other Menorca painting, please do leave a comment. I'd love to, I'd love to learn more and whatnot. I'm sure others, if you made it this far in the video, I'm sure you'd love to read more information as well. So any more context, feel free to leave it down below. But, regardless, I think that all of it goes to show that like I said in the last video, history is complicated, and its study is a lifelong pursuit. Whether you're interested in military history, art history, economic, political, anything really. And as you learn more about one particular field, it tends to open up new avenues and allow for more questioning and whatnot within all of the others. So, again, what do you think? If you made it this far into the video, I'm sure I have an idea, but is this an interesting kind of video? Would you like to see more of this kind of thing? Are there any particular pieces of historical artwork or photographs, for that matter, or anything like that you'd like to get my thoughts on? If so, then let me know in the comments, and I might like to make a few more videos like this in the future. It was easy, it was fun, and I think it does still pose some interesting opportunities and provide for some interesting questions. So thank you all for watching, and most particularly, of course, to those of you who support my work on Patreon, because it is by your generosity that I am able to keep on doing what I do. Of course, if you'd like to learn more about what I do, because it's fast becoming far more than just YouTube. Actually, I have 2 books in the work just now, but more details. I could ramble about that to you later on, I'm sure. Well, again, all of that fun stuff, you can find out more by visiting my website, nativeoak.org. And until the next time, we're finally ending. Wow, all right, shorter video. Yeah, I don't do short very well. Until the next time, my dear viewer, I am, and I shall remain, your most humble and obedient of servants.